this session is to improve or help improve our students' pronunciation. So I'm going to start sharing my screen with you, and please let me know if you see it.
Yes, we see it.
Thank you. Okay, so let me start by introducing myself. My name is Ceci Saucedo. My experience has been in teaching mostly, and right now I'm working as director of learning in two schools here in Estado de Mexico. I work in ITJ, Thomas Jefferson, in both schools, Santa Monica and Son Esmeralda, as director of learning in both of them. And well, it's a pleasure to be here and to share this space with you. I hope you find it useful. And yeah, let's start. Let's get to work. So, as I said, the purpose of this session is to work in your students' pronunciation. Let's identify some mistakes in phonics, common vocabulary mistakes in teachers and Spanish native speakers. We're going to clarify some pronunciation mistakes and readdress the situations. And then we're going to celebrate a little bit our diversity and be positive about the process that we are at now of improvement. So let's start by asking you, how do you feel? How do you feel about your English pronunciation? If you're feeling very confident, like in one, or if you're feeling kind of frustrated or kind of, you know, demotivated a little bit. So how do you feel? I'd like to know first how you feel. So if you can share your answers in the chat, or if you want to open your microphone, please feel free to do it. No answers here in the chat. One very confident, that's great. Okay, and as well, how do you think your students feel in the pronunciation? In my teaching experience, I know that sometimes, okay, we have five here. That's great. I feel confident. That's great. So we know that some of our students sometimes don't want to participate in class because they start feeling like not so confident, right? And they feel kind of pointed out. But at the same time, sometimes they don't know how to improve. So sometimes they feel like in four, sometimes they feel like in five. So let's help them by understanding what is the process behind this. So why does this happen? So this frustration starts because we've been very used to our home language, our native language, since we were kids, since we were babies. So this is a very natural process that starts from here. So unborn babies are getting ready to learn their home language, right? And this is why sometimes in English classes, what happens is that you speak in English and you model English for your students. I identify some students that answered in Spanish. They answer to in Spanish because they don't want to feel exposed, right? So we're going to give them this confidence that they want. If they want to improve, we're going to model for them how to do it. And let's understand and help our students understand that this is not a natural process. So all of these milestones that we show here, they happen naturally. So you don't have to learn them. Maybe you can get a little bit of stimuli or you can get a little bit of help, but you actually get through all these milestones naturally. And what happens with language, especially with second language, is that it's a learned process. So it's something that you develop with your students and it becomes a both way process in which you improve for them to improve as well. So it's like an ongoing process. It's continuous, it's always happening. So you improve, you model, they model for others. So in order to understand what's happening in our students, we have to understand what's happening in ourselves as well. So Here we have some survival guide in 4 steps, in which in these 4 steps and or recommendations, we're going to see and address some of the most common situations that we face in our classrooms. So the first step to help our students improve or clarify their mistakes is to work with letter sounds. So this is a very natural way. And actually, these sounds, if anybody identifies what this is, these are the letter sounds on the diagrams from Jolly Phonics. So Jolly Phonics is a program for early years, and it's very, very friendly, like student friendly, but also for teachers. So one thing I want to do first is to model some of these letter sounds, well, all of these letter sounds that are the basic English sounds, so that we clarify how to model it for our students. So the first step is to identify the sounds and identify how they change from Spanish to English. There are some of the sounds that maybe you think are the same, but once that you start practicing them, you notice that they're different. So for example, the first group, we have those are exactly the same, right? So we pronounce them in English and in Spanish in the same way. What happens with this sound? So in Spanish, we will call it I, right? Like very open I. But that doesn't happen in English. In English, this sound is a little bit closed. So if you see my mouth, it's not as open like E. It's more I, I. So that happens because the muscles that you use are actually different from Spanish to English. Then we have the P, N. Those are exactly the same. K, I, I. This one happens the same as the I, right? It's not as open as in Spanish, like eh. It's more eh, eh. This is one that we're going to talk a little bit more further on, that is constantly a mistake. So we pronounce it like very deep, like, and it's actually soft. It's a soft sound. We have this one as well, the So sometimes we kind of mix it with Spanish. It's actually a very soft sound. It's the same. This one that we have here is also a common mistake because in Spanish we say v. So you can actually see my tongue, like the vibration, but that's a th sound in English, a strong th. So in English, this sound goes behind your teeth and you say d, d, d. So it's very different, Spanish and English, and this is going to be key for when they're starting to listen, like the pronunciation, and then transfer that listening to writing. We also have the g, o, and this is a very common mistake as well, because this one has different sounds. So sometimes it can be you, but sometimes, most of them, it's oh. So it's not O. So for example, if we're going to say bus, we don't say boss, right? We say bus. It's not an A, it's not that open. So you kind of close a little bit your mouth and you pronounce it here. Oh, oh, oh. Then we have the the f, the b, right? Here, b, b, b. This is a digraph. Digraphs are by our Digraphs are two different letters that when they come together, they make a new sound. So we have A. When we model this pronunciation, we have to make very clear that we do one single sound, not A. It's A, right? The same happens with the G. G is very common mistaken in Spanish and English. G is strong, and it's different from this one that we have here, the Y, we pronounce it Y. So I've heard some teachers kind of mixing both, saying jello or jazz, but no, it's soft sound. This is Y. and this is j. Then we have a different diagram. We have this one here that is o, 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 same. You take a deep breath and you just make one single sound, o. Same happens with I, same happens with E. E. As you see, this is a longer sound and it sounds different than this one, that the E, E, E. So this one is like a little bit deep, E. And this is very open, E, right? Then we have the O, we have Z, W, W. That's also a mistake. Sometimes we say like window. It's a window. It sounds deeper. W. So you also feel it here when you pronounce it. W. We have ng, we have v, we have u, short and long, u. We have the y, x, ch, sh. And th, they have two different sounds. One that is more like vibration, v, and one that's go v, right? We have w, ow, oi. We also have u, and ah. So focus on these sounds. In these ones, what we're going to do is the same as the other diagrams. We take a deep breath and we just pronounce one single sound. It's not ow, it's ow, right? Comes together. Then,
por favor.
sorry. Okay, if you want to say something, just open your microphone again. I thought it was a mistake, but if it is not, please feel confident enough to open your microphone again. So here in the chat, can you share with me any thoughts about these sounds? One sound that you weren't pronouncing properly, or that maybe you do pronounce it properly, but you find it kind of hard to actually make the sound. Is there any that you're just reinforcing right now, that you're practicing right now? So anybody in the chat, if you want to add something to this conversation, that'd be amazing. Now we can move on. So then, what happens here with the consonant blend? And that's a very common mistake that I've also heard in different students from different stages, that they kind of get lost in these two sounds. So when you have a consonant blend, you have to pronounce both sounds, like black. So you have to make sure that you're using both sounds and then the vowel. The vowel is going to be key to develop this pronunciation in your students, because that's going to give you the proper intonation of the word. So black, club, flap, glad. You have to model a lot when you're modeling for your students. You have to make very clear this movement in your mouth so that they can start identifying how to use the vowels properly and how to pronounce both a consonant at the same time, right? Then a like at this stage, are we or like going forward? Are we doing okay? Does anybody have any doubts? No, we're okay. If we are, then we can keep moving to the second step. So in this part, sorry, it's my mouse that. Yeah. Okay, so in this second step, what happens is that as Spanish native speakers, we have the same pronunciation and we usually have the same mistakes. So this is a very common thing that's going to happen in your students. So when you're, what do you think that we learn first the pronunciation and not the accent or the intonation? What does that happen? Can somebody share their ideas or their thoughts in the chat? Why do we focus first on pronunciation? So the reason behind this, the reason why we start working in pronunciation in our students before going to a deeper understanding of accent or intonation is because we have to understand certain rules of pronunciation that are going to help you develop your intonation. So when you're talking about accent, I mean, there's nothing wrong about having your Spanish accent, right? If you have a Mexican accent, if you have somewhere else's accent, that's okay. I mean, that's not going to give you proficiency. So the first step of reaching a better proficiency level is going to be pronunciation. Why? Because pronunciation can change the meaning or clarify the meaning of what we want to say or what we want to share with other people. So that's why we have to start by modeling this difference with our students. Sometimes students, especially the ones in middle school, maybe high school, they start trying to develop more the accent and not necessarily they not necessarily have the pronunciation to develop that accent. So when you have a proper pronunciation of each of the letter sounds that you have no word, the accent and the intonation are going to improve more naturally. So that's why we focus on that one first. Then, have you noticed this mistake? If you have, please let me know. It's a very common mistake, especially when students are new to the language. So, what is this mistake? So, this comes from this one. Mistake number one that we can identify in our students very commonly is the difference between B and V. So, when you are doing the first one, B, you have to make sure you model your lips for your students, right? B. And then the second one, V, V. So if we read here, vowel, then we don't make the difference. Exactly. Exactly. It doesn't happen as much as in Spanish, no? And I think that's something we know, that we also have this B grande, B chica, because we don't do that difference or not so clearly, right? When we're speaking Spanish. So that's why we have to start modeling for our students how to pronounce properly these two different like phonemes. And yeah, so if we focus here in these words, you can see that they're very similar, but the first sound is different. So we have best and we have best. As you know, you're going to model for your students. So one activity that you can do for your students, especially when they're learning these sounds, is that you, for example, I'm going to do it right now with you. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to say a word, and with my lips, you have to identify which is that word that I said. So, for example, I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to tell you a word. I want you to see my lips and tell me if I said the first one or the second one. So, invest and vest. Let me mute myself. Exactly. It was the second one. Then the next one. Okay. Yes. So if you can identify that, right, the difference between best and best, that's actually something you can model with your students. Maybe this is not going to be so challenging if you're just modeling one word. But if you're modeling a longer or new word, that's going to be a difference. Yes, exactly. Best and best, or bet and bet. Exactly. So these are some activities that you can actually do with your students. You can record yourself and put it into a presentation and get them to choose which is the word that you were saying, right? So this is just an example of what you can do in class. Then the second mistake that is very common in Spanish native speakers. We have this word that says sun. This is very easy because we have a vowel right after the sound. But what happens with the others? Can you tell me? Have you noticed in your students what happens with the others?
May I participate?
Yes, of course.
I can notice that some students, when it's followed by a consonant, they pronounce it with an e before. For example, school, school, and that's not correct because the sound is s. Thank you.
Exactly. Yes, and that's a very common mistake. So this one starts from early years. So this is something that you keep adding and adding and adding into it, right? So if you don't correct this when they're in kinder, when they're learning new vocabulary, this is gonna stay, right? And this is something that they're going to start doing naturally, and that's something we absolutely don't want in our students, right? So the way of modeling it is to pronounce the s and make it very clear, like stick, spoon, skunk, right? And that's gonna happen, as I said, in early years. But I've noticed that when a student comes into school in first grade, second grade, or more, what happens is that sometimes they don't have the same level of English, sometimes they didn't have the same training, sometimes they didn't have like the same strategies as the rest of the students. So maybe you can start identifying those mispronunciations. And of course, it's very important that we model it. So the way of modeling these two mistakes that are very similar because they're like adding or changing the sound are through word lists. So you can give them actually word lists, focus on their needs. You can also do activities in which they participate. Yes, um, in which they participate, I don't know, presenting something, explaining, conversation. That's something that they really have to do and they have to start trying a little bit more. So when you're working in PBL, when you're working with research, that's a very good way of practicing these mistakes without actually making it very obvious or very evident that what you're trying to do is to correct a mistake that maybe it's more for your young learners, right? Next mistake that we have here. Do you have any idea of what this can be? You can open your microphone or you can put it here in the chat. Do you remember? Yeah, exactly. Short and long sounds, right? So what happens here is that if we compare these two, we have sheep. Which one is sheep? The first one or the second one? Which one would that be? So that would be the first one, right? Sheep. And it has a long sound, exactly. And the second one would be ship, ship with the E sound. Then, if somebody is so fit, is that correct? If we say that this girl is fit, or is she fit? The second or the first pronunciation? Exactly. Exactly. So fit as in short, or feet as in long, right? That's the difference. And then in the third example, we have a very common mistake that is this or these, right? So one is plural, one is singular, and we have to make very clear the difference with us, with ourselves, and then with our students. And I have here I found very funny because I wasn't looking for this, but I found it. And I want to share with you because this kind of pronunciation, long and short sounds, can actually change the whole meaning of a sentence.
Oh, can I take a piss? Sorry. Can I take a piss? Sure. The bathroom is right there. The bathroom? I don't need the bathroom. You say you wanted to take a piss? A piece of cake. Oh, you want to take a piece of cake, not a piss. Right. Of course. Oh, cool. Thank you.
So these are things that actually can happen. If you ever speak to a person that is not very related to this difference in sounds, you can actually notice that there are certain things that they're not saying properly and that change the whole meaning of the sentence or the intention of what you're trying to say, right? So that's something that we can share with the students, the importance of being clear in phonics. So the same as this our next example. So as we were saying before, when we practice phonics, we have to put them to practice to actually notice the difference in what we're saying. So for example, this color, right? I've heard many kids and teachers saying the word red, and it's not red, right? The proper sound is a soft so it's more red. Same as this one that many people say jello, like in G, as in a J, when it's actually a soft sound, yellow, right? The same thing happens here with this one. I've heard too many people saying hat. It's not hat, it's a hat, right? So it has to be very clear for us to not change either the meaning or the quality of our pronunciation. And this one, we already mentioned this is a bus that many people say bus, like an a, bus, or boss. And it's not boss as in an O, right? It's bus. So we have to make very clear this difference that we don't change a J for Y, the R as in Spanish, for the R as in English, that we don't change the J for the H sound or the O for the U sound, right? So these are very, very common. And actually, this happen more naturally when you're having a conversation. When it's usually the word, just the word, it doesn't happen as much as when they're practicing in a conversation or modeling sentences, reading out loud, right? So that's why there are some activities that are very good to address these mistakes. So, for example, pointing out other words when we are reading out, maybe having to for example, with pronunciation in words that are similar, as we said, best and best, you have the picture and you read it, and they have to choose which is the picture that matches to the word that you mentioned, right? Those are some activities that you can do with your students. Also, a lot of conversation, not just vocabulary lists, which are great because they clarify mistakes, but also using that in a context, right? So that's why using PBL, even station-based learning, when you are doing smaller groups to help pronunciation in conversations, it's even better if you do it with a group with a similar profile. So working in learning stations or small pullouts could be a better way of addressing these mistakes and practicing with your students. And then this is one that I consider very important because this can happen always at any time, right? So this is high frequency words related to the school. And these are mistakes that I've heard, whether students or teachers pronouncing in a very not clear way, like it's kind of clear what they're saying, or it's totally mispronounced. So, for example, if we look at the first one, schedule, that's one that I usually hear like shadow or schedule, like no, it's schedule or something like that. So we have to be very clear when we pronounce schedule, right? Then hallway. I've heard people saying hallway, like in a hole, and I let's open a little bit the mouth to say hallway, right? And it doesn't look like you're in a hole. Then lecture. Lecture is also a word that some people find kind of hard to pronounce. And if you're mispronouncing these words, you're going to model it wrong for your students. The same for subject. In subject, what I've noticed is that people sometimes don't pronounce the last sound. They say like subject or something like that. So let's make it very clear when we finish a word with a consonant, like subject, like playground, that we actually say the final sound. Then when we say these common phrases like raise your hand as well, hand at the end, the d hand, and at the beginning, it's not hand with the Spanish J, it's a soft sound. This is one that I've also heard very frequently, that is geography, because sometimes people say it like geography. It's not geography, it's geography. So make sure that you pronounce both. Also, cafeteria. Sometimes people say it as in Spanish, like cafeteria. And no, let's make very clear this modeling for our students. And the last one that I've heard, even students, it's a history that many people call it like history, as in Spanish, that we have historia. So many people say history, and let's make very clear history with it so that our students are not copying a wrong model from us. And this is one that I think is the hardest step from the ones that I have identified, and I think it's very common. And it's a very good way of starting to like to give proper stress to the correct syllable. So for example, we have many rules of stress placement in words, but these are the most important that I find, because these are very common. So we have that in most of the syllable nouns and adjectives, we have stress in the first one, in the first syllable, as in table, as in doctor, as in happy, right? We can add like many others, as in coffee, as in heavy, right? We pronounce the first syllable a little bit stronger with a little bit more of an accent, and then the rest of the word. Then when you're talking about two-syllable verbs and preposition, it's usually the opposite. You give the stress in the second one, in the second syllable. So for example, become, arrive, between, that's something very useful because these are words that we use like very commonly, right? Also, for example, I know attend, about, below, around, those have the stress at the end. So if you don't know this where to place this stress in a word, these rules are like, I mean, there are exceptions, yes, but it's very common that they stick to this to these rules. Then compound nouns like blackboard, like airplane, like classroom, seafood, raindrop, those that are compound nouns, the stress usually falls in the first word. Then compounds adjectives and verbs, it happens in the second one. So for example, old-fashioned here, understand, overlook, or maybe overflow, or maybe short temper, right? Those have the stress in this part of the word. Then, these are very important. So there are certain words in which when you read them, they're exactly the same. But the pronunciation, the stress in the symbol is going to give you if you're talking about the noun or if you're talking about the verb, right? So for example, contract, that's an agreement, or contract, record or record, present or present, import or import. So that's very important. Talking about import, that's very important because you model it for your students. So according to the meaning or the idea that you want to share with them is how you're going to model that stress in the word. And here, another one, question words, they have the stress in the whole word, right? Who, why, what, when, how, when, right? And I found this very important to mention because as teachers, we usually use numbers as well. So when it's a teen at the end of the word, that's the stress, like 14, 15, 16, 17, right? Instead of saying 16, right? Like 16. So 16, 17, 14, whatever. It's the opposite in the other with the other ones, like 20, 30, 60, 80, 90. And you can focus on the first syllable instead of the other, right? So I think this is very useful because as teachers, we usually use this vocabulary. And then I have these two examples of word stress. So what we're going to do is that we're going to open these links. These links are free. So these are free resources that you can use with your students. These are there's some that from Cambridge. There are some in a British council that are very useful as well. So these are to practice exercises to practice the stressing words. So what we're gonna do is that I want you to look at these words. I want you to mention them. You can say it out loud or you can say it for yourself. And where is the stress? And then we're going to listen to these words and we're going to see if we're placing the stress in the right place. So I'm going to give you some seconds for you to read them, to place the stress if it's in the first or the second syllable. And then we're going to listen.
Eyesight.
Where is it? Eyesight. First or second?
First.
Next.
Eyesight. Injury.
Injury.
First.
First.
Eyesight. Injury. Recovery.
Which one? Recovery.
I will say in the middle, but I don't know if it's the first or the second.
The second.
Okay.
Eyesight. Injury. Recovery. Reaction.
Second.
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 Great. Okay, so next. We're not going to listen. You're just going to say it to yourself. And we're going to say if it is same like in the first one or in the second one, but without the listening part. So who can tell me the first one?
On the first, remedy.
Remedy. Next.
Second.
Second.
Can you pronounce it?
Condition. Condition. Second.
The seventh is. You said second?
Second.
Second.
Infection.
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 Second. Infection.
And this one?
First. Consciousness.
Consciousness. Third.
First, consciousness.
Somebody said third. Let's check. Exactly. Consciousness. Okay, so these are just some examples of the resources we can use with our students, right? And let me go back to slides. So as we say, these are free, these are online resources, and you can use these ones, you can use the ones from a British council, and these are very useful to practice with them. And then we're going to do something very, very quickly in which I'm going to give you 2 minutes. We're going to read this text. You can scan it from here. So you're going to read this text, and what we're going to do is to try to identify the words that you find hard to pronounce. So you're going to read it out loud. We're going to turn off the microphone and we're going to read it out loud. And then as we're finding these words that maybe are not so easy for us to pronounce, that maybe we know how to do it, but it's kind of hard anyway, we're going to share those thoughts in this Padlet. I'm going to share the link to Padlet here. Let me put it here in the chat. So I'm going to share the link to Padlet so that we can compare which were the words that we found hard to pronounce. Here it is. It's this one that we have here, right? And we have 2 minutes to share our thoughts. Okay, so time is up. If we didn't get to the end of the reading, that's okay. But I want to listen to you. I want to, if you want to add into a Padlet, if you want to put it here in the chat, if you want to open the microphone and just share with the others what were the words that maybe you have to practice a little bit more, something that maybe you know how to pronounce it, but anyway, you find it kind of challenging to properly pronounce. So this is a reading for B2 level, which is more or less the level that many students can achieve in our school. So for example, if we're talking about, I know, 9th graders, 10th graders, they must be more or less in that level. So what are the words that you found hard to pronounce? Or maybe it could be hard for your students. So this kind of practice is a very good way of developing metacognition with your students. So the way of doing it is exactly the same as we did right now. You share the reading with them. You put them together in smaller groups or make them get them to organizing a think per share routine. And then they can start sharing and comparing which other things they have to improve. And also you can put in your classroom, you can set a special space or board in which you can share all these words that were mispronounced or were finding hard to pronounce. And that way you can, okay, psychics, Q, exactly. So maybe there's some words that, for example, if we were in a class, we could add in this board or in this space so that it's visible to others and that we celebrate our mistakes and areas of opportunity and give them more confidence towards starting to develop their areas of opportunity. So that's the way we were modeling right now how you could use it with your students, right? And some of the recommendations that you can model with your students is to identify your needs, identify which are the things that you have to improve at, using translation tools to clarify pronunciation. That's a very good strategy. You have to actually give them time to you have first to model how to use the translation tool, and then you can give them some time in your lesson to explore these kind of tools and to start developing this metacognition of monitoring what are their needs and how to solve them. Then as well, with students that are struggling a little bit more in pronunciation, setting small targets with them and maybe focusing if they have to improve in their phonics, setting small targets related to that, or if they have to improve in their stress placement, maybe that could be a target, and getting them to get better, like they start pushing themselves to get better without actually feeling overwhelmed because it's too much, because pronunciation has too many areas. So breaking it down into smaller targets can help them feel more confident that they can achieve it. And then as well, have a space or take a time to celebrate your home language, because we are talking about environments, bilingual environments in which we talk a lot about English and developing English, and sometimes we leave the home language to a side, and making them feel confident enough of what they're doing and what they know in their own language is okay and is actually very valuable. That's also going to set a nice atmosphere for learning languages. And well, I think that this year session we achieved the learning objective and the success criteria. We identified some common mistakes. We were clarifying the pronunciation, and we were celebrating diversity and the positive practices for improvement, not only for ourselves, but of course for our students, different strategies we can use at or during the lesson, or the different ways in which we can organize the groups to improve in this, right? So here's a survey. I'm going to copy and paste the link into the chat. This is for us to know what you think about the session, how you felt, and yeah, just to share space with you. So give me a second. Let me copy and paste that link here. And that'd be the last part of our session. I don't know if you want to add something, if you have any doubts, just I feel confident enough to open your microphone or say it out loud. So here's the link to that survey. And if you already did the survey, that'd be all from me. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Okay. I love your
Thank you very
accent.
much. Thank you very much, Ceci, for your information. Everything was real. Great.
Thank you. I hope you find it useful.
It
Thank
is.
you.
I think for all English teachers that we know, that pronunciation is one of the most difficult parts
It
of
is.
teaching. Yes,
At
this
the
information
moment of
was really useful.
So here's one question. At the moment of speaking, when do I have to grow in pronunciation? Okay, so for example, when you're setting targets for your students and you have one, I don't know, let's imagine that you're trying to focus on the difference between B and V, right? And if that's the case, that's what you're going to correct. And that's what you're going to give feedback about. So if you start pointing out at every area of opportunity for your students, maybe they're going to feel overwhelmed and it's going to be unachievable. Like I never get there. So that's why it's important for you to clarify what things you're going to correct and what you're expecting from your students. And starting from there, you can start modeling for them and setting, like small targets also for themselves. Like, okay, if I'm going to be assessed with this skill, I'm going to focus on developing that skill. And that's going to help them consolidate a little bit more. And that's one thing. The other is that if you have these small targets to work with your class, what you can do is if you have a rubric, if you have like any way of assessment, you can add that into your rubric. Like, I know, a stress placement. That's part of your presentation. So even when you're talking about, I don't know, cartoons, whatever, we're going to assess that small part of speech. So that could be like a way of correcting. And the way of doing it would be at the moment so that they identify themselves, or if they're presenting and you don't want to interrupt them, maybe you can write it down and then share it as a feedback at the end. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Did you send the link? I haven't seen the
Yes, let
to
me
for
bring
the
it
survey.
again.
Okay.
It's right there.
It's in the chat.
Okay. It's in the chat?
Yes.
I didn't see it. Okay.
Did you find it?
Yes, I saw it. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any other questions or any other comments? I think we're finished. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ceci.
Yep.
Please, could you help us fill in these forms that you can find in the chat? Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for joining us this webinar. Okay, and thank you so much, Ceci, for all this information.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, just we ask you to fill in the forms, and as Ceci says, if you have no any other question, have an excellent night.
You too, and thank you very much for everything. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a great, great experience. Thank you very much. It's very useful that we can use this in our daily basis practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much.